Kudo Shinichi's first kill as a detective was the first and most important for his growth as a character. The 11th episode of Detective Conan, the Moonlight Sonata murder case, is considered to be the most important within the side storyline series. Like Koguro's class reunion murder case, it fills in the characters we are not yet familiar with and gives more depth to the image. Unfortunately, this is also the most lacking aspect of the current Detective Conan. This 11th episode is more prominent than the ones with similar plots. It is the first special episode that often exceeds 30 minutes. This episode was specially remade in the 1000th episode of the anime. This case shows its differences from other cases from the very beginning, the first time a ship appears within Detective Conan. If you don't understand what this means, then try to recall those classic cases in Detective Conan. Whether it's the main storyline plot of a dual mystery on a full moon night, or the pinnacle of everyday cases, the Symphony serial murder case, boats always make a frequent appearance. A case that has a boat appearing equals to a higher quality case. At least this was my first impression of Detective Conan. The episode kicks off a week ago when a man named Aso Keiji, who claims to be calling from Tsukikage Island, implores Mori to investigate an incident. This person had sent a letter to the Mori Detective Agency before, and the words in it were cut out from newspapers that were pieced together. The main content of the letter is that shadows on Tsukikage Island will disappear once again on the night of the next full moon. In addition, the client's voice was modified with a voice changer, so no matter how you look at it, it seems like it's someone's criminal statement. However, the other party had already transferred 500,000 yen as an entrustment fee, as Uncle Mori felt embarrassed to refuse, reluctantly taking Ron and Conan on this trip. The first thing they did when they arrived was to ask the island's personnel registration office about this person named Aso Keiji. The new staff employee didn't know anything about this name. Only the manager was taken aback by the name, and the older residents began chattering. It turned out that this client had died more than 10 years ago. He was a famous musician who grew up on this island. On a full moon night 12 years ago, he returned home after finishing a performance, then stabbed his wife, daughter, and set a fire. Losing his mind, he continued his performance even though he was surrounded by flames. And finally, the piece that sounded from the piano was Beethoven's Piano Sonata, Moonlight. The poignant and romantic way of death held a sense of unreality. As such, Uncle Mori thought it was a nasty prank commission and was about to give up. Conan, however, believed that the real purpose of the letter was to have him investigate the cause and affairs of Aso Keiji's death. After all, the commission fee had already been paid for, and no one would likely want to set up such an expensive prank. Now, the labor worth the money had to be paid in return, and the three went towards the community center to find the island mayor, who had the most to say about the situation. On the way, they first met Asai Narumi, who was a doctor on the island. The doctor recognized these strange faces and guessed that they had come here from Tokyo as she had, then warmly introduced them to the island, some advantages here being fresh air and a quiet environment. Can't tell that these people are doctors here. They could be part-time tour guides for all I know. As soon as the words left the guide's mouth, a ballet car drove past, shouting from a loudspeaker to solicit votes from the islanders. Now was the mayor election period on the island, and there were 3 candidates in total. Shimizu, who was the representative of the fishermen, current mayor Kuroiwa, who has recently dwindled in popularity, and Kawashima, the wealthiest man on the island. Mori hastily interrupted the topic. If the introduction were to continue going on like this, then the doctor may as well give an overview of the entire island's history, and they only need to go to the community center to ask a couple questions. It just so happens that those 3 people just mentioned will probably be there too, as tonight was the 3rd funeral anniversary of the former mayor. The scene turns to the community center, surrounded by a large number of residents expressing their dissatisfaction with the current mayor's behavior. The current mayor Kuroiwa and the wealthy Kawashima just mentioned had gathered in the building. In addition, there's the daughter of the current mayor, Kuroiwa Reiko, the fiancé to her, Murosawa Shuichi, and who's serving as the mayor's secretary, Hirata Kazuki. These few people seem to be communicating in a friendly manner until the secretary came in with a panic. He said that a detective from Tokyo wanted to meet the mayor, which changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. Mori waited impatiently in the hallway, while Ron went about her daily task of finding Conan. Conan was busy exploring the building alone, and found a strange room. The interior was empty, the rear of the building was next to the sea, and there was only a dusty piano in the middle of the room. The secretary glanced by, then hurriedly stopped the 3 people from touching this cursed piano. This was the piano that Aso Keiji played more than 10 years ago. Not just this, 2 years ago on a full moon night, the piano once again played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, while the player this time was the former mayor whose heart had stopped beating. Conan didn't believe in curses, so he simply played a few tones, then found that the tones were normal, and then of course was kicked out. At the door, they again met the doctor who came to attend the anniversary of the funeral, as well as the last candidate, Shimizu. At the quiet funeral, everyone was mourning the death of the former mayor. Only the two candidates for mayor were bickering with each other, with one of them believing that the other who invited the detective was his opposition, with the purpose of interfering in the election to become the next mayor. The wealthy Kawashima didn't think so, got up, and went to the bathroom. Mori's three-member group didn't attend the funeral, and were waiting at the door for the ceremony to end. Conan, with his absolute pitchability, was confused by what the secretary just mentioned. If this piano is really cursed as he said, and no one here dared to touch it for 2 years, then in that case, its tune is well too preserved. As such, there must have been someone who tuned this piano without being discovered by anyone. Ever since that letter, strange things had continued one after another. Today was the night of the full moon. Could something really happen? At this moment, the Moonlight Sonata broke the tranquility of the anniversary celebration. The meaning of this music that played again after 2 years was self-evident. Everyone gathered at the door of the piano room and dared not open it. Conan was the only one that rushed into the room to find the deceased Kawashima. Dead body reported. The three-member group immediately carried out their given task. Ron went to call the police, Mori exposed his identity as Sleeping Kogoro, and gave a speech to comfort the crowd. Unfortunately, this is only the 11th episode, and the status of Kogoro wasn't enough to shock the others. But Mori the show-off could relieve the atmosphere no matter what. Conan was in charge of the investigation. This time, there was also a new teammate in the form of a doctor who could perform a simple autopsy before the police came. The sound of the piano had come from a tape recorder. The cause of death for the deceased was suffocation. From the suit jacket of the deceased floating in the ocean outside, and the water trail on the floor where the deceased was dragged, it can be seen that the deceased was drowned in the seawater by someone between half an hour to an hour prior. The culprit also deliberately left the first few minutes of the tape blank in order to leave the room before the music played and can be heard. Before all of this, Mori's three-member group had been waiting at the gate of the community center. The possibility of outsiders going in and killing someone was very low. The few people there now present the greatest suspicion. First, proving everyone's alibis, and then considering potential motives. The number of participants in the funeral far exceeds the total number of suspects in other cases. In order to remember who left the venue at a specific point in time without cameras, you'd have to find and bring in Hakuba Sagaru. Secondly, who has the most to gain from Kawashima's death? It has to be the two mayor candidates other than him. Even if these two people really killed him, then is it necessary to drag the corpse from the sea onto the piano and play the music? During the investigation, Mori discovered that there was sheet music on the piano that they hadn't seen during the afternoon. Suddenly, one of the suspects, a man named Nishimoto, rushed out the door of the community center like crazy after seeing the sheet music. The secretary then explained, and we learned that this man was a childhood friend of the current mayor. He used to be rich enough to spend a lot of money on alcohol, women, and gambling until the death of the mayor 2 years ago. His whole personality changed, and he seemed to be always afraid of something. As soon as they stopped talking, Ron brought back a police officer, but because it was getting late, he simply registered the people present and let them go back. On the way back, the mayor's daughter, her fiancé, and the secretary are seen together. From their conversation, it could be heard that there seemed to be some secrets hidden about the piano. Mori's three-member group bid farewell to the doctor and walked back to their hotel. The full moon shone on Conan through the dark clouds. Looking at a shadow, Conan finally realized what the shadows will once again begin to disappear from the letter, and the Moonlight Sonata played by the deceased both meant the murder spree will continue. The three returned to the community center with urgency. The body and evidence had been packed by the police. If the culprit wanted to continue the murders, then they definitely had to return here. Now the biggest breakthrough in the case was the sheet music, which was left by either the victim or the murderer. Ron, who's proficient with a piano, saw at a glance that the score was the Moonlight Sonata, then began to play on the piano, and noticed that the fourth bar was very strange. Mori suspected that it was a death message left by the victim, and began to examine it. Several people were engrossed in deducing, and didn't notice that Dr. Narumi was standing at the door, bringing some dinner to reward the detectives. Several people enjoyed their dinner, whilst also trying to get more information about the island from the doctor. It's a pity that Dr. Narumi was not born on this island, but came from Tokyo to work here 2 years ago. Asking about the events of Asokeiji 12 years ago was of no use. Although the doctor didn't know what happened to the former mayor 2 years ago, the cause of death of the former mayor was a heart attack, and it didn't seem to be a homicide. It's just that his face after death was convulsive, as if he saw something horrifying before he died. Also, on the night of his death, the piano room was not hidden in secrecy as a certain window was wide open. Just as the doctor was showing them the location of the window, a shadowy figure outside flashed by, as Mori and Conan hurriedly tracked them down to no avail. Mori guessed that that person was the murderer, and their purpose was to recover the sheet music. Everyone returned to the piano room to prepare for the possible attack of the culprit again, and thus the room where the murder occurred ushered in the dark night.